This is one of the dumbest things I've ever done. The table saw is by far the most dangerous tool in the workshop, resulting in 60,000 injuries per year, most of which could be prevented. I put together my top 10 list of mistakes made on the table saw that could kill your project or even you. We're gonna go over a few of these and even test some of the most dangerous ones out. So this should get a little bit interesting. Let's get started. So number 10 has absolutely nothing to do with the actual table saw itself and everything to do with what you're wearing. Long sleeves, loose clothing, and gloves are an absolute no-no for the table saw or anything else that spins around really fast for that matter. These blades spin around at thousands of RPMs. All it takes is one little catch of a piece of fabric and your entire hand is going in that saw blade. Unlike a hard piece of wood that the saw blade cuts nice and cleanly through, gloves are fibrous material, they're soft, and they can snag on a single tooth and be pulled in before you know it. Not even the safety system of a saw stop could stop the blade fast enough to prevent damage if you were wearing a glove. But not only does this apply to clothing, it also applies to long hair. If you've got longer hair, be sure to pull it back because that could catch on the table saw and you don't want to see what happens after that. As I mentioned, we're going to be putting some of these mistakes to the test. I think this is a good one to start with. I want to see how fast that blade can pull in a glove. We're going to go outside. I've got my old contractor table saw set up. It'll be the perfect setup. I don't use it anymore, so if it breaks, sad, but not a loss. All right, let's go. All right, so we've got the old contractor saw set up outside, away from everybody and everything. I'm going to be wearing a face shield, standing behind a 1/2-inch sheet of plywood, and I'm going to use this 8-foot long stick to push the glove into the blade, and we're gonna see how fast this thing catches and if it pulls it in further. I've got a kill switch behind the wall that I'll be standing behind, that way I can yank the power if need be. Wish me luck. Oh my God. It took a minute for it to actually catch it, but when it did, I lost track of it. Now I see where it is. Hold on. So it actually pulled the glove through the entire saw into the dust port and just mangled this thing. If your hand was inside there, you're going to the ER. So coming in at number 9 on the list is improper setup. Way too often we're in a hurry, we jump over to the table saw to make our next cut, we hit that start button and we send it. We should always make sure the table saw blade is parallel to the fence and the miter slots. An easy way to make sure these are parallel that I learned from my friend Jonathan Katz-Moses is take a marker and mark one of the teeth. Now measure over with your square or straight edge to that tooth and make sure that it just barely rubs against the edge. Now move to the back of the blade and using that same tooth that you marked, make sure you get that same amount of rub on the back. Once you've got your miter slots all parallel, move over to your fence and do the same thing. So what can happen if your table saw blade isn't parallel to your fence when you're making your cut? Well, the better of the two outcomes is you screw up your project and you have to redo it. The second one is probably the most scary thing that has ever happened to any woodworker, and that is called kickback. So kickback in this instance would most likely happen as the piece of wood is traveling, it gets pinched in between the fence and the back side of the blade, launching it backwards right at you. So in just a few minutes, I'm actually going to recreate our own kickback.
What?
I'm a little bit nervous about it, but it's for science, so stay tuned.
Bro, what are you talking about, man?
I've got a few more mistakes that I want to go over because they can also lead to kickback as well. Next up on the list is improper blade height. Now, although this one is less likely to cause serious injury, it's more likely that you're going to end up with a crappy cut on your project. There's a lot of different opinions on what the best blade height is, but I'm going to show you guys the real sweet spot. A lot of people believe that the best blade height is when the teeth are just above the top of the wood, but that's simply not true. The best height is actually when these little valleys in between each teeth that we call gullets are right above the top of the wood. This is because when your board finally reaches the saw blade where that first tooth comes in contact with the top of the board, there's a downward angle, and this is going to reduce tear out and give you a better overall cut. But if we lower the blade down just above the surface of the wood, You can see when that first tooth that comes in contact with the top of the board, it's actually way further back on the blade and the angle is a lot more upright. That's going to cause more tear out on the top of your workpiece. Now, on the opposite side of that, having a blade set too high can increase injury in two different ways. One, you've got a lot more of this blade exposed that you can come into contact with, and two, you're increasing the risk of kickback from the back side of the blade. It also messes up the bottom of your cut more often because you're getting more tear out on the bottom rotation. The next big mistake that I see way too often is not utilizing your table saw's built-in safety features. I realize that sometimes we make cuts where we have to remove these features, but for the majority of the time, these can stay in place and we can make a nice, safe cut. This is called a riving knife. It's a metal knife-shaped attachment that sits directly behind your table saw blade and it locks in. It prevents wood from binding after it gets around the table saw blade. If it binds around that blade, then you're gonna have a big chance of a kickback. This knife keeps that wood separated as it exits past the blade. Our next built-in safety feature is the blade guard. This is designed to keep you from accidentally coming in contact with the blade. I see way too many people remove the blade guard and the riving knife and just run with just the blade against the fence. You are asking for a kickback right in the face. On either side of the riving knife, attached to the blade guard, are these anti-kickback paws. These are a toothed metal plate and they're designed to dig into the wood and stop it from being thrown backwards during a kickback. I've personally been saved by these more times than I can count. Number 6 on the list is putting your hands where they shouldn't be. Riding your finger down the side of your fence while you're making a cut will not stop it from being pulled in if something were to happen. That's why you should always use a push stick if you've got to get close to that blade. A good rule of thumb that I like to follow is if you're within 6 inches of that blade, you should be using a push stick or a sled or a miter gauge or something besides your hand. Another really bad habit that I've been guilty of myself a few times is once you get through your cut, reaching over the blade. This is super dangerous. One, because that blade's spinning really, really fast. And two, on the back side of the blade, we have an upward motion here and it's pulling everything back this way. So as soon as you pass that center point on the blade, everything gets pulled back this way. If that blade catches that piece of wood at the wrong spot, you're gonna be pulled back with it. And if your hand's on that side, you're in trouble. The next one on the list is freehand cutting. I know it seems obvious not to do something like this, but I have seen this a time or two. Freehand cutting is when you're cutting a piece of wood and you don't have it up against your fence. This is probably one of the easiest ways to cause kickback. You need to be cutting completely straight on a table saw. Any slight variation as you reach the end of the blade, it's gonna catch that and sling it back at you. For that reason, we aren't gonna attempt to test this one. You're just gonna have to take my word for it. Next up, we've got making crosscuts without a crosscut sled or a miter gauge or some sort of jig. The problem with this is as this fence gets further away from the blade, you've got more and more likelihood of this board racking one way or the other and binding to that blade. Once that happens, it's gonna kick back and hit you right in the face. Now, if you don't have a crosscut sled already, I'm gonna show you a really quick and easy way to make sort of like a hybrid crosscut sled out of the miter gauge that comes with your table saw and a board. So this is the miter gauge that came with my saw stop. Make sure you set it in the miter slot first. Now you grab your board and flush it up against that. Now we've got 2 slots on either side of the back of the miter gauge. Now we're just gonna drive a screw into the back of that board, lock it in. Now I've got a quick and easy crosscut sled on our miter gauge. Now you can make a safe cut without putting your fingers at risk and keeping your board nice and straight. Now this works really good in a pinch if you just got to make a cut really fast, but this shouldn't be your only option as far as crosscut sleds go. Coming in at number 3 on the list is always use some sort of outfeed table. I'm guilty of this one myself. You've only got a couple cuts to make. You got a mobile outfeed table like myself. It's not set up, so you just jump on the table saw and run it. So one of the big safety issues with not having an outfeed table is as you're running your board through the table saw, you lose the support on the back side of the cut. So if you've got a longer piece of material that you're cutting, it's gonna run through and fall off the back of the table, lifting up the front, and that will catch the teeth on the back side of the blade, leading to, you guessed it, kickback. Another downfall to not having an outfeed table, especially on longer cuts like this sheet of plywood, is you have to stop your cut, walk around the table saw while it's still running, which is super dangerous by the way, and then pull from the backside. This usually causes your workpiece to drift towards the blade, leaving you an uneven cut, and it's dangerous. I actually built this mobile workbench / outfeed table in my previous video. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can check it out. Next on the list is one of the leading causes of table saw accidents, and that is complacency. You've been making the same cut for 20 years, never had a problem, but you've developed bad habits that haven't resulted in injury yet, but one day you're making a cut, you get distracted, you reach around the table saw, and boom, you cut your finger off. Now it's time to test out the kickback, which leads us to our #1 mistake on the list, and that is where you're standing during your cut. 6 out of the 10 of our mistakes all could lead to kickback. If you're standing in the way of that kickback, you've got big problems. So I'm gonna set up a scenario with kickback to see how fast and how dangerous this could actually be. I've got this old sheet of drywall that I'm gonna set up behind the saw. This way it doesn't launch the piece of wood backwards and break the window behind the saw. I do wanna repeat, do not try this at home. This is for science. Okay, so I don't wanna be anywhere near this when this test is going on. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the piece that we're using on the table saw and I'm going to use some double-sided tape, stick it on to an 8-foot long strip. That way I can stand over on the other side below my table so I'm out of the way of anything, and I can pull it through and hopefully it will catch and the tape won't hold on and we'll have a kickback. This is one of the dumbest things I've ever done. Holy shit. It hit here and then hit here. This is at least a 1/4 inch thick. The corner of the board hit there. I know that because it's green and there's some green paint left on the drywall. So it hit like this and then bounced like that. If that would have hit you in the ribs, trip to the hospital right there. And that rounds out my top 10 mistakes that could kill your project or you. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you guys want to see next week.